Great to have you. What I'd like to start with, if we could, do a roundtable of introductions. So I'm joined by my colleague, Hal Derenian, and our guest speaker today is Rob Kerr, Senior Associate of Quest. Our topic today is the economic impact of community energy and emissions plans. And I'd like to go around the room and have folks introduce themselves and who they represent, and perhaps if there's any key achievements or updates or highlights you'd like to share with the group, now's the time to do that. No more than 2 minutes each, please. And I'm going to switch it over to Rob Kerr. As short as possible, thanks. Bruce, I'll start with you. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Eddie, you've been working with the city of Fredericton for many years there now. There was kind of a little bit of a lull in our work with Quest. I've been kind of maybe not reappointed, but I'm at more of a focus there now of getting renewable energy into our buildings and getting more online. We do have a plan for carbon emission reduction to 2030 for buildings. So we're really working, getting some traction on this plan there now. So yeah, I'm getting back in with your group and really and I'll be reaching out to you directly, Eddie, for some advisement and things like that. But yeah, the city of Fredericton is kind of back on track and working hard, progressing with our emissions reductions goals.
Thank you very much for that update, Bruce. Appreciate having you on today. And Margot, I see you're here too.
Yes, hi, Margot Shepherd. I'm a city councillor at the city of Fredericton and very interested in Quest and Quest's amazing progress made over the past number of years. I've known Eddie for quite a while now and look forward to working with Quest and Eddie more closely from the city's point of view. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marco. I'll turn it to Swati. If you're speaking, you need to unmute yourself. Swati, are you there? Okay. Tema?
Yes. Hi, Eddie. Hi, everyone. I was not here from I just arrived, so just introduce me. Yes?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so Clément from Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick. Nice to meet you, everyone. And I'm just a sustainable development coordinator for the association. Thank you, Eddie.
Great. And you've received an ETF grant to start with working with the communities. Yeah,
sure.
Perfect.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks for joining. Terry.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Terry Cormier here. I'm with SGIN Associate, basically doing project management for the community electrification program. We are actively pursuing communities to engage with that program where we support the implementation of their net zero plans and further help the community electrify. So our latest status, we've got one community that actually is prepared to take the request to their council, and another community that we're just starting to work with right now and getting a proposal out the door. We have a mandate from ACOA to do this with 5 communities in New Brunswick and use it as a model going forward for the rest of Canada. So, hi.
Great, thanks, Terry. And I look forward to our continued collaboration too.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, we're in the middle of signing an MOU with Quest. So yeah.
All right, yeah, among other things.
Yeah.
I'll turn it to Chantal.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chantal. I've met several of you before. My current role at NB-PEI is program lead on the new construction side and nonprofit housing. And I do have some of my colleagues that typically attend, but it looks like I'm representing NB-PEI today, so I'll do my best with that.
Thanks, Chantal. Good to see you. Nick Walker with the City of Charlottetown.
Good afternoon. Yeah, my name's Nick Walker. I'm the energy management engineer with the City of Charlottetown. Latest update would be that we're just in our early stages of starting an updated climate action plan. So previous to that, we've had a community energy plan, but it's a little out of date. So we're working on that now.
Is that including any kind of targets such as a net zero target in the years to come?
Yeah, so like our current community energy plan has like a 2050 100% renewable target, but then the province has a slightly different 2040 target. So it's just going to be to update that and kind of align those two things.
Okay, thanks a lot. Susan Atkinson. You there?
I don't, yeah, just takes me forever because I don't use this very much. I'm like, where is it? Hi, yeah, Susan Atkinson. Glad to join you today. I don't typically, but obviously the agenda looked very interesting. So I carved out some time to participate. I'm the Director of Greenhouse Gas Mitigation with the Province of New Brunswick Climate Change Secretariat. And like everybody else, we work super closely with Eddie and with other partners in the province, including our Francophone Association and through our Environmental Trust Fund. We definitely are funding both those that support and those that directly work in reducing greenhouse gases in our communities. So I'm really excited because we actually have targets in our action plan for community greenhouse gas emission reduction plans. And I'm sure Eddie has mentioned that to you before, but stay tuned as we start to track and report progress on that. And I imagine everybody that's in New Brunswick that's on this call will be leaders in this space. So we really appreciate your help. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Great to have you. Turn it to Chris Beer.
Thanks, Eddie. Chris Spear, Tennyson Andrews. We just recently completed our final report with the accelerator. Eddie presented to us actually this past Monday night, so we're excited to go with that. Our council made a motion last year to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30%, even though we'd already reduced them by 20% the previous 4 years. So we kind of took care of the low-hanging fruit. So we're going to be using Eddie and his team and the reports they prepared to kind of take us to the next steps to really work hard to meet those emission goals.
Yes, thanks very much, Chris. And as you know, I've sent all the accelerator communities a request to engage on our review of some of the reports to date, making sure that they're reflecting any changes, any significant changes anyway, from the municipal reform process. Thanks for having me in front of your council as well. That was greatly appreciated. I'll turn it to Luke Ballmer.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, Luke Ballmer with the COA, Economic Development Officer here in New Brunswick. Portfolio includes clean tech and energy. So happy to be here and support the great work Quest is doing. Thanks.
Good, thanks for coming. Erica, I see her here. She's a colleague. Angela Banks, I'll come back to you, Erica.
Hi folks, Angela Banks. I'm with the Office of Net Zero and manage the PEI Department of Environment, Energy, and Climate Action. We're working right now as government to update our energy strategy, which will be integral to things like updating our Energy Act, and we do have a significant list of community energy projects that we get off the ground.
Yeah, just to let you know, you're echoing like it's like an echo chamber when you speak. I'm not sure why that is. You maybe have two connections or
just the one. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, your voice is coming over through twice. Okay, Marcel, I'll go to you.
Yes, sorry, I can't have video, but yeah, Marcel Viano, Asset Management Coordinator for the Francophone Association of New Brunswick Municipalities, IFMNB. My colleague Emma is here. My Little Baby is a municipal geoportal project where we integrate asset data into a GIS environment. So we're always looking at ways to integrate climate into infrastructure renewal, and that's why Emma and I are teaming up together and making sure that this data is used effectively by municipalities.
Okay, thanks very much, Marcel. Yes, your geoportal is an exciting prospect for asset management. Aaron Brown, you're here. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Eddie. Thanks. Yeah, Aaron Brown. I'm a analyst with Province of New Brunswick under Susan Atkinson's team, greenhouse gas mitigation. As Susan said, we have a number of targets in our action plan related to community climate action planning and reporting tool that we're developing. So yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks. Mark Morrison.
Thanks for having me here today. Mark Morrison, I'm the engineering manager, town of Quispam-Sis. We've been working with Eddie and his team with the climate change committee that we have to work on our action plan. We've got some lofty goals to acquire. We've already been actively pursuing ways to address. We've got some solar projects that we're looking at. We've got some other initiatives where we invite residents to take advantage of some of the programs with the province, and anything to do with climate change and stormwater management. It's close to my heart, with trying to catch up with what's happening and try to mitigate the negative effects. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much for coming. I have two folks left. Katiwe, are you there? Did I get that pronunciation right? I don't know who you are, but in case, Seth, I see you're here too, and then we can get on with it.
Sorry, yeah, Katiwe is, yeah, oh, there she goes.
Oh, hey, Erica.
Hi, you absolutely got that right. Sorry, I had put in a message in the chat earlier. I was having some audio issues, so I've just rejoined. I did get to catch some of those introductions. Hello, everybody. I am with Prairie's Can. So Quest has a somewhat similar project with similar goals and targets and so on for communities out west. So we're just really at the beginning of all the exciting work that's going to be done with Quest. So excited to be here, and excited to be here more as an observer than anything else, to hear what's been happening out east. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, great to have you. Thank you very much for joining. All right, so now that we've done the introductions, I'll just do a quick recap of the program and our extension to the program, and turn it over to our Senior Associate, Rob Kerr, who will introduce and discuss the report that is the economic impact of community energy emissions plans in New Brunswick. Time remaining, we'll do some Q&A and discussion. Thanks for all for coming. And to get started, we're going to take a look at the accelerator. For those of you who are new to this group, the Municipal Working Group meets monthly basis. It includes champions from New Brunswick and PEI in the municipal sector that are advancing their community energy emissions plans, guests as well as energy utilities that serve those populations. We launched an accelerator program with 14 communities 3 years ago, roughly speaking, and we've extended this program to continue working with the existing communities and intake 6 communities in this next cohort, both Francophone and Anglophone, and to help them through the process and stages of developing emissions plans. These were the 14 pilot communities that we've been working with, continue to work with. And for those of you already in the program, you'll be very familiarized with this. For those of you who are perhaps new to the conversation, communities that were brought into this program were categorized into 3 categories, one being seekers who really essentially starting from the beginning and needing to develop a plan. Those what we call doers are communities that were close to or had a plan, but may not have had an implementation strategy and a good structure around moving that sustainably forward. And leaders that were perhaps well on their way, may have some capacity, but require some tailored support services in different areas. The accelerator program includes working with those existing communities and intaking 6 new communities, specifically to provide those communities with a similar benchmark assessment, looking at the best practices across Canada through our Smart Energy Communities benchmark tool. We'd also conduct an energy mapping exercise for some blue sky thinking about what's possible in their local context. And following that, a community energy plan development workshop, which does a deep dive into action planning and the measures. Continue to collaborate with the municipal associations, both Francophone and Anglophone, to engage New Brunswick municipalities and continue to develop and publish success stories throughout the course of the program. This is one of our monthly webinars on a variety of topics. We're very happy to welcome Rob Kerr today and to make presentations as needed. And so Rob, it's now over to you. Thanks, Erica.
Sorry, there's my mute off. Thank you, Eddie, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Kerr. I'm a senior associate with Quest, as Eddie has mentioned a few times. Today, I would like to, first, as a bit of a warning, I've got a lot of slides and I'm going to try and get through them in 30 minutes, 35 minutes max. The final report is accessible and available, and we'll make sure you get links to it. It's on the Quest website at the moment. So I will touch on the highlights of the report, illustrate some of the outcomes and conclusions in that report. So if we could just get started, a little bit of background. Some of this has been mentioned. The report has been supported by a number of funders. All of these, I believe, are also supporting the broader SEC program itself. And in this particular report, it's based on specific case studies that were done with 6 communities. Some of you are here today, and we've certainly spent time together doing those case studies and presenting them and editing them and finalizing them. This report really is built on the analysis and other qualitative and quantitative aspects of those case studies, and we are aiming to look at parlaying that information to a province-wide picture of economic potential. My last comment here, this is what the cover of the report looks like. The basis for doing the analysis and the general framework of this report is based on the existing community energy plans of the 6 participating communities listed here. They provided the numbers, basically, the quantitative aspects of the work we're about to go through here quickly. And just back to this qualitative and quantitative thing, like any analysis, we have to draw some boundaries and make some assumptions, make sure they're good assumptions, well understood, and not undermining the outputs. And a great deal of attention was paid to those assumptions, especially on the quantitative side. But we also talk about the qualitative, which I'll call anecdotal items related to job creation through the implementation of community energy plans. So there's a number of resources on which this work is built, not just the 6 case studies, which I've mentioned already, but there was a kind of a, what would I call it, a first step done prior to 2021, where this one kicked off with 2 municipalities, St. John's and Sussex, where we had done similar work. And we used those 2 reports to not only provide some resources available on the website. There's a workbook that helps communities actually use their own numbers to determine potential job creation. There's a national webinar recording available, and the links are here. And there'll be active links when we circulate this presentation. So today, I'll just give you a framework for what I'm about to launch into. Some of the fundamentals behind a transitioning energy economy. You see it's in quotations. It's a more and more commonly used phrase, and a little more understanding of what we mean by that transitioning energy economy and its potential benefits to the implementation of a community energy plan. A bit of discussion around cost versus investment. This is not an uncommon delineation when you talk about economic development. There is a difference, and we'll get into that a little bit. I want to talk a bit about the role of municipalities in enabling their local economy to transition. And then we're going to get into a bit more of an analytical aspect about how jobs are actually created, how you, the inputs that you provide, how you mobilize your knowledge already about your carbon baseline, your energy use in your community, and start to hang numbers on potential job creation. And so the outcomes really go back to what started off the evolution of this project, as I quickly outlined for you, trying to answer that question, what would be the provincial-wide impact on job creations if all municipalities and their communities implemented their community energy plans? Can we put a number to that? And how does it compare to other job creation initiatives? How would the province potentially look at this as it begins to evolve its climate-based policies and programs? So I'm going to just jump into the fundamentals here. I would say that some of you are from the 6 participating municipalities. You've seen some of this, so there's a bit of repetition. I'll also say, before I get into this, these fundamentals really can support a communications role as you continue to advocate in wherever you're sitting on the chessboard to your audience around why community energy plans and the implementation of them are important. And, you know, I'll use just a very, very recent example. I know Chris is on the call from St. Andrews. As Eddie mentioned too, they talked to council on Monday night and they used some of the messaging in their case study in that presentation to council. So I've got a slide here that really looks at some of the common fundamental goals of most of the CEPs that I reviewed. And I won't read them all. You could deep dive on all of them. I'm sure that you recognize all of them in your roles. The one I want to emphasize is this third one here, the maximizing benefits for the municipality and the community. And that's important on a global issue like climate change, keeping a firm eye on what the local benefits are of doing this work. And that can often get lost in the messaging and communications with your community. And this economic aspect of the messaging can be very important in the simple notion that everyone's part of the local economy in one form or another. This is a snapshot of all the community energy plans. So now we're getting into some of the numbers. We pulled these numbers from the existing community energy plans. I've already heard a couple of comments about updating those plans, and that's great. These numbers do move around as communities grow, as energy costs change, and as targets possibly change. Net zero is much more common notional target, at least in some case, a hardwired target in some communities. But in order to put a framework around the analysis, we did go to the existing targets that are in the plan. And the base years, as you can see, move around. But we're trying to create a common basis on which to continue to do analysis. I'll come back to this particular column, the energy total. It's a very important one because obviously these are expenditures that are made and they're currently exist part of the existing economy and the transitioning economy. So this is just a narrative of beginning to sort of parse how jobs are created in kind of buckets here. So the first one about saving money and increasing the efficiency of how energy is used in your community, that's fundamental to all the community energy plans. And it's quite a simple descriptive notion that saving those dollars through increased efficiency keeps those dollars in the community and allows those dollars to be spent differently in the community. That's at a high macro level. And that first item here is where we've done the majority of our analysis. The second one is attracting local investment to implement your plans. So this is the place where I often point out, and we'll get into this in another slide, is that who's going to pay for the plan is a question that will come up in some form or another, as I'm sure you're very familiar. And the answer is not as straightforward identifying one institution or one party to invest. It's about mobilizing investment dollars into your community. And I'll talk a little bit more about where those dollars can come from. But it does not have to be the taxpayer. That's often the thing that I always tack on. It's been my personal observation that's often a default conclusion when municipalities and local governments take a leadership role, that is perceived that the taxpayer or that it will be, implemented on the tax base. And there may be elements of the plan that's legitimately paid for that way, but certainly not exclusive. And then the last one is the big macro global economy is just burgeoning and blowing up. I'll give you some numbers. And the ability to attract businesses primary and secondary businesses in the transitioning economy to your community or your region are significant. And I know our provincial folks at the table here certainly understand that. So a little bit about, this is a few graphics here to talk what we mean by what's transitioning. So very simply put, you know, the evolution of energy supply to our communities was very local, 150 years ago, increasingly centralized. Technology allows for bringing energy infrastructure, gaining the benefits from having that infrastructure more local, has great potential to stimulate the local economy in a different way. And here's some snapshots from that are pretty intuitive, I think. We look at the way energy was produced and used to build our communities and maintain the function of our communities. Very simple technologies: water, horsepower, burning wood. And these middle group of graphics are just samples of the increasing centralization, largely around electricity, but not exclusively. And the kind of infrastructure we see today, very large, very centralized, and inherently in that, and certainly we enjoy a lifestyle today largely supported by that last grouping. But there are some technical realities to that kind of infrastructure and delivery systems, and it's really around being highly inefficient and not in your communities, to put it very simply. What we see now is this last complex graphic, and this is straight out of a Quest publication, another publication, that talks about all the elements of what a highly functioning, sustainable energy community looks like. We could dive into any one of the graphics on this picture, but I'll just highlight some of them. Solar PV, wind turbines where appropriate. So we have local generation, much more disaggregated generation. We have smart systems that help dispatch energy. We've got district energy, thermal energy systems. We've got EVs, charging stations, et cetera, et cetera. And really, when you look at the recommendations made in a typical community energy plan, and this is just pulled as a sample of one of the plans we've reviewed, and it's quite similar in many communities, different numbers potentially. You can see that the items on this list and the estimated reductions that can come from them would fit very well in that picture. So the simple message is community energy plans, the measures identified in them really define a transitioned energy economy and the technologies that really fuel that economy. And the second message is they're largely local. And that's the basis on which we begin to dive into some of the numbers and get a handle on, well, what does that really mean? This is perhaps a little out of order, but this is just coming back to my comment about large systems and how inefficient they are. And I don't mean like poorly managed systems. It's just the nature of large centralized systems. This is pulled from an Ontario municipality, but very consistent in its shape in many, if not most, municipalities. And without going into any of the details, we look at the primary sources on the left, we look at the fuel types, and then we look at their uses: transportation, lighting, equipment, et cetera. The point I want to make on this is that the gray areas is the inefficiency. In other words, the energy lost as these systems deliver energy to our communities and the end uses in them. And the second most important point, always keeping our eye on the word economy as we talk here, is that the customers, your communities, and your citizens and institutions and businesses in your communities pay energy bills like we all do. Those energy bills have to cover this gray area. They pay for it, but don't get to use it. And that's sort of a flipped around way of looking at how we pay for energy today and what we get. And the technology that exists inherent in our community energy plans that actually can get at this. Another point to be made here, this is a sample of a utility in the town where I'm talking to you from, Guelph, Ontario, of where your dollars go on an electricity bill. Now, this is going to vary a little bit from community to community, but I'm confident in saying that the fundamental message that the majority of your energy bills not just electricity, as this sample is showing you, but heating fuels, excuse me, and other energy fuels are all supplied by centralized systems, and the majority of them leave the community. In the case of this example, 80% of the dollars on my electricity bills, quite literally, leaves the community to supply, to pay for and maintain centralized infrastructure. And so we don't benefit from the vast majority of my community does not benefit from the vast majority of my electricity bill in this example. As I've said, you get into layers and layers of detail. This would move around a little bit from community to community. But the point remains here that the opportunity to keep dollars local, fundamental aspect, fundamental goal of a community energy plan, can be served very, very significantly when one understands this fact. So I'm going to use some examples pulled from the case studies we did. This is, I believe, Quispamsis profile, and it shows how their energy breaks down, what fuels are being consumed in the community to construct a baseline of energy use. And this is how it breaks down. I'm using it to illustrate, to get a handle on weighting and scale. So where does the majority of dollars go, or energy used and end uses? And you can see gasoline, electricity, always the biggest ones. Diesel's obviously competitive as a transportation fuel, although that tends to move around a little bit. But transportation is always a big chunk. So costs at the pump, and electricity, especially when electricity is part of heating, can be quite a significant chunk of any pie in a community. So if we look at the breakdown, continuing to use the example of Quispamsis, we see how these usages break down in gigajoules, which is a measure of energy, and the cost per gigajoule. So I can tell you with some humility that these numbers are different today than they were when I prepared the slide deck a week ago, roughly. They move around a lot. I don't have to tell you that. I think, you know, in terms of the level of rigor in this analysis, we can say some things that might sound very simple, but they never go down. They tend to spike and move around, and we've seen some really big spikes in certain fuels since we did some of those case studies, and those of you at the meeting today might recognize that. The goal here of constructing this table is, what's the price tag in your community for all energy? And another way to put it is, what are your citizens, your businesses, institutions putting out yearly to maintain their operations and the energy required to do so? Quispamsis, when we first met, that number was in the low 60s. And so you can see it's climbing and significantly, and I'll talk a little bit about inflation in a second. And so as a continued illustration, qualifying this 80% number as I did earlier, it could move around, but just to get a handle on how many dollars are leaving the community, we see a big number. I don't have to even cite it. You can see that. And then coming back to the question, can we keep some of those dollars local? And what does it mean to our local economy? So as we keep this thread of our original goal in this work, in this final report, we're starting to hang some numbers on this example, and we did them for all of the participating communities. This is the picture I mentioned just a minute ago. What about energy inflation? So no one has the full crystal ball to predict energy prices out to 2050. It'd be great if we could. But there are some sort of modest assumptions that one can make. And I had some conversations with a few folks in the provincial government about the reasonableness of these ranges. And the answer was, you know, it's not crazy to say that energy inflation of 2% per year on all energy costs across the board is not unreasonable, and 4% on the higher end also not unreasonable. The illustration I want to make here is that 2050, which is often a number chosen when we start pivoting towards net zero discussions, we can see that the energy outputs across the board in a community go up significantly. I don't have to illustrate that, almost double at a modest 2%, over three times at a 4%. So energy inflation on the status quo is significant. And obviously a major motivator and part of a narrative that this report hopefully will study in your own spaces, that the status quo may be pricey today, but it's going to be much more significant as you wrestle with very aggressive targets, as net zero obviously is. So let's talk a little bit about how jobs are created. Those of you who've done your Economics 101 courses will know this. This is not highly complex, but we really look at levels of job impacts, and we've used some, appropriate symbols here. Direct jobs are, the cost of putting up solar panels, insulating homes, the services industry, engineering, design that goes into that are direct expenditures. So if a home is retrofitted at a cost of $10,000, that's where those dollars would go, just to pick an example, a number. Indirect jobs is a supply chain. Obviously, the term supply chain has become much more familiar to all of us during the pandemic. But that's all the pieces that go into these direct expenditures I've just described. Everything from the nuts and bolts, kind of a literal symbol there. I often take a moment to say, some of the technologies, quote unquote, that are used in the recommended actions that I showed you example of are not complex, highly technical. They can be found at your hardware store, and you can buy insulation at a hardware store, as you know, as a link there. And that's what I put that there and make that point because that's local. And then we have, the supply chain of transportation of bringing stuff to your community or moving it around within your community. The last is dollars that are spent in the general economy. So we have some sort of generic pictures of shopping areas here. When you're freeing up dollars, they're not necessarily circulating around and around on energy projects, but are actually getting into your local economy. And that's what induced jobs really mean. So when we get into how we start, and I'm just a forewarning here, we're getting into the analytical part. So I'm going to be showing literally some calculations and breaking it down carefully here. There's two levels of job creation impact. One's the investment phase, which I've described to you is directly into the projects. And then the savings phase. So when you keep dollars local through a more efficient home, more efficient business, more efficient transportation systems, et cetera, those dollars stay local and stimulate the economy in a specific way, which I'll illustrate for you. It's very common to use multipliers that are provided by other agencies or think tanks or governments themselves about how jobs are created per $1 million. This particular example comes from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. As their name would suggest, they're very much focused on this area of study. And they have provided these multipliers for comparative analysis of where dollars go and how jobs are created. I have colorized, made red, 3 of them, because that's the ones we're going to use. There is other providers of multipliers, and I would just observe, and this is part of the scope of the analysis, that some of them change a little bit. So if you were to read a story and you would say, that's not the number Rob told me yesterday, you might see 21, 25 there. The point I want to make is that the relative difference between these bars in the graph maintains fairly solidly when you look at different sources of multipliers. So we made a decision as we were editing and creating this report to just continue to use this one from the American Council. So now we're getting into some of the nerdy stuff. Just a warning, I am going to be going fairly quickly on this because it's 22. This is all available in more detail in the report. There's explanatory text and footnotes. It's quite robust. So I'm going to walk through this fairly quickly. I'm going to talk about how jobs are created in a pre and post situation. Okay, so pre-implementation, jobs per million in a general economy are 17. That's just the general economy, all activity. The point we want to make here is the dollars that go to utilities, and no disrespect to utilities. I always be careful to say that. The job creation impact of your energy bill and the income that utilities need to run in a regulated fashion is fairly low. And that's where a large part of the dollars are going in the status quo in your communities, at least at this point, as you get into the early stages of implementing your plan. And really, what we're trying to do is, instead of paying energy bills at a certain level, we're trying to improve the efficiency, reduce the dollars going to the utility sector, and have it mobilized in other sectors. And so this takes us to the bottom grouping, where we have the construction. I'll just, at the risk of flicking around, we look at the construction. This is a rather general multiplier, but construction includes most of the activities that are in a typical CEP. Much more job creating potential there, and 20 is the multiplier that we use. We compare that to dollars in the general economy now going to these measures. So if a homeowner invests in retrofitting their home, for example, they're not spending it for dinner, they're retrofitting their home, etc. So you see that difference. And so the bottom line comes back to those two elements of job creation. One is the investment phase, 3 jobs per million, and the savings phase, where the real benefits happen when you have a differently configured economy around how energy dollars get spent. We have 8 jobs per $1 million. And these two numbers, as simple as they may be, are a real basis to take them and now apply them to the actual numbers that have been determined from the existing community energy plans. Okay, now this one is another analytical basis, but I just want to spend a second on how we came up with it. And I'll try and be as concise as I can. I mentioned it already. How much does it cost to implement your community energy plan? I can say with some confidence that some of the plans I've seen do make some very broad estimates, but a real price tag on the total package of measures in your current plan, or an updated plan if you're in that phase, is really hard to nail down clearly at the planning stage. You really have to get into implementation, receive quotations, et cetera, et cetera. So the real challenge in this work was, how do we come up with a number that helps us determine what the cost is so we can start having a reasonable estimate of job creation? And what we've done here is something that's very common in the many roles I've played in my career around estimating costs, is a simple payback notion. So when you know how much dollars you spend, and you have a target to reduce those dollars, which I showed in an early graph, you can determine what would attract the kind of investment. In other words, simple payback is really a function of how many years would it take for those savings to pay back the investment. And we've chosen an 8-year number here as a starting point for a total estimated investment. Now, I've said that very quickly. I can tell you we spent hours talking about this. Eddie will know about, is this reasonable? Does it make sense? Are there other ways to look at it? And yes, there are. You'll see later on when I look at some of the sensitivity analysis we did, we looked at different versions of this payback. But this was an effort to understand what it costs. And there's a recommendation that comes out of this learning in the report that I'll get to at the end. And so taking those calculations, I've given you a very brief summary in. We took all of the plans, their existing targets, the dollars that would remain in the community if those targets were achieved, what the investment would be to reach those targets, as I've just described, and then we've applied the multipliers. This is the investment phase, and we can see across the 6 participating communities, we see just over 1,000 jobs potentially created. That's just at the investment level. Then we go to the next slide, which is the savings phase. And again, just to repeat, it's the dollars that stay in the community ongoing through now more efficient local economy. And we apply this multiplier, which is a much more powerful multiplier. And we get, in terms of job creation per million, and we get 400. Now it's a lot less because the savings number is not as big as the initial investment, even though the job creation multiplier is more powerful. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I'm maybe going a little too fast. But let's come back to some of the more qualitative comments we want to make. Who provides the dollars for community energy plans? This slide is in here through, actually, I would say through just experience and conversations, not only in this project, but I would say in my own personal work elsewhere. It's always is who's going to pay for it. And it's important to sort of back up and get an understanding when you talk about the economy and how dollars flow to implement something as ambitious as your existing or future community energy plans. You have to look at a sort of a myriad of potential funders. So I just list them here. We know that our provincial and federal governments largely are supportive of their communities and their contribution to climate targets. It varies at the provincial level. I don't need to get into that to those that are aware of it. Our federal government, this is just sort of a subset of maybe that previous bullet, is the FCM. We all know who FCM is, I think, and they've been, 20 plus years supporting sustainable communities, largely around climate change, and continue to be pivotal in supporting the planning efforts. So FCM has been party to a lot of the plans we've seen in concert with other funders, including the province. And they're now largely, FCM is pivoting some of their green municipal funds towards implementation projects like retrofit, building retrofit programs. The last one is really the big one. I should have maybe gone first. The private sector investors are beginning, and this is actually an understatement when I read it now, the market for those that manufacture all of the technical elements of a community energy plan and the products and services related are burgeoning markets. And they're looking for places to implement or mobilize their products and even locate manufacturing and services. And we'll dive into this one a little bit more. So the role of the municipality. So I'll start at the bottom. I wrote a blog. It's on the Quest site that dives into this. I had advocated for this blog because, again, my experience in this project and elsewhere is that municipalities take great leadership. It's evidenced by meetings like this always in developing community energy plans, but often struggle to articulate what their role is when it comes to implementation. And I think when we talk about economic development, it's a great place to actually articulate that. There's a lot municipalities have in their toolkit, obviously, to mobilize their local economies. And so, but it's not complete. And this comes to my point about who pays. It's not the taxpayer. And so I've itemized these here. Time doesn't allow me to dive in. Some of them are very self-evident. Continued leadership, I've just mentioned, cities and municipalities take the lead in developing planning. The governance role that municipalities can play with some of their economic development agencies, et cetera, can be quite powerful. You have legislative tools, planning tools at your disposal. They're always in flux, as I don't need to tell you in New Brunswick. Integrating those tools into planning towards more sustainable outcomes, obviously. And last but not least, economic development, which is the purview of many municipalities, whether individually or collectively, regionally, and pivoting more towards supporting, attracting, retaining the products and services that serve the implementation of community energy plans. So I encourage you to read that blog in a little more detail. Just a snapshot of the scale of the market of products and services and the job creation that can come from it that are looking to essentially implement community energy plans. This is a snapshot from Quest itself. I update this slide all the time when I'm doing presentations because there's always market information, refreshed market information available. This is just a snapshot. I won't read them. I'll just say you can see that the numbers are big, and these are the size of the markets. Investors in an open market situation are investing in these companies. They are looking to places to locate their operations and to sell their products and services. And this is where municipalities, to be, sort of very anecdotal about it, can open their doors to those companies that are looking to make investments. So very quick, I know I'm over time. We have taken the municipal profiles that I've snapshotted a couple of times here and looked at what does it take to parlay these numbers into a province-wide picture. This slide here just shows that this is where we pulled the previous project of St. John and Sussex into the analysis because we had very similar numbers, and statistically it helped us be a little bit more accurate. We categorize them according to their size, and you can see how that's broken down. Then we looked at the totals across the province and basically leveraged them to a provincial-wide report. I might have to skip over this. I'm sorry, Eddie, for taking a little bit too long, but we did a little bit of analysis around what if your target moves. So we saw a bunch of different targets. We can see, obviously, the more aggressive your target, the more stimulation it would have to job creation. I think that's evidenced by some of the analytical stuff I showed you. So this is just a graph of the investment and the savings, vice versa, and the total. You can see it rises significantly the more aggressive your target is. We've made some assumption around fuel costs and populations. There is a very interesting statistic here, and this is New Brunswick should be very proud of itself. It's done more CEPs than any municipality, any province in the country in terms of population representation. We made some estimates on targets. I've shown you an example of that. We've made some estimate on paybacks. I have some examples on that. Energy inflation obviously has an influence as well. And just because it's not clear at this point in time, carbon tax is not even included in these numbers. No question, the carbon tax drives up the cost of energy. That will have some impact on reducing demand and keeping dollars local. So it only make the numbers I'm showing you here more attractive. And this is our inflationary estimates. You can see it all rises up at different targets, and that's what this legend's showing you. I'm sorry for going so fast on these. Again, we look at a 4% inflation. You can see we're getting into province-wide really big numbers, 150,000. Using that analytical approach that I've described, using Quispamsis as an example. This one has different paybacks. So if the cost of implementing community energy plans is not as expensive as we've estimated, we can see that the job creation is not as powerful, but it still stays in some significant numbers. In this case, this example, a very quick payback, which is kind of unlikely, but it depends on your plan or the stages of your plan, potentially, where you'll take the fast payback items first to demonstrate success. We have a relative result in terms of job creation. Quick slide here on how this supports the Provincial Climate Change Action Plan. Kind of self-evident here, building low carbon communities. I'll just say, I'll summarize these bullets by saying a great start has taken place with 51 existing plans in 104 municipalities. I know that's changing, but we had to use this profile of 104 because that's Canada. This was an important part of this analysis. And a percentage of population represented in the municipality space, which doesn't include rural, is 3/4, or 52% of the entire population of the province. A great start. And the economic opportunity, well, I think it's self-evident that we've been discussing that here today and putting some initial numbers to it. So this is the summary. You can see it's like a matrix. You go to the bottom, quick paybacks, low target. Obviously, province-wide is going to show, I would say, arguably say, still some impressive job creation numbers, all the way up to aggressive targets of 2050 at 50%, and larger scale investments as a result. We're into the pretty serious 6-digit figures. And I'll finish with this. Just some observations and recommendations. I think some of these I've said already, that job creation obviously has great potential, and municipalities have already demonstrated the tools and influence to attract investment through the creation of their plans. So, recommendations is really to continue to support, and Quest obviously continues to do that by seeking support to serve their members in the SEC program and beyond. We would basically say that a message to the province and organizations like ACOA, ways to support municipalities that are addressing their CEPs. The only thing I'll illustrate there is the community energy plans are a structured process. They're not done willy-nilly. There's a lot of common structure and methodology to all the plans that exist. And that makes it really easy to look at how you leverage that into more communities, how other supporters, of which there's quite a number we've talked about, can understand the impact and outcome. I think we've, in this project, improved the game around how you actually get a handle on economic impact of these plans, whether it's individually or collectively across the province. And with that, I'll finish, and thank you for your time. We'll distribute this deck. My email's there. I'm always happy to take a call or an outreach to clarify any questions you might have. Thanks, Eddie.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rob. I will entertain questions as well as comments. And while we're doing so, Rob, I hope you don't mind, we're going to launch the evaluation now for anyone who needs to drop off, and we can carry the conversation on for a few minutes. Thanks. I'll open the floor first. If not, I have a few of my own. Chantal, do you have a question?
I do. On the scale of New Brunswick, when you're adding up all of these community plans and saying this is the economic benefit for New Brunswick, it seems like your job numbers are heavily skewed, moving the utility to the community. New Brunswick has a New Brunswick utility, and so maybe some of those jobs are just moving around. Has that been considered?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chantal. So you get to the fundamentals of how you do economics, and I think you've touched on a fundamental point that often we talk about this as something new dollars. To a large degree, you're moving dollars around. So I avoid this term, but since you've asked the question, there are winners and losers. I hate using the term losers, but net benefit does change. And it's true. If NB-PEI had their main head office in your town, which we know they do have a head office, so the majority of their jobs are located there. So you have to adjust this message to accommodate that. So you're absolutely. It's one of the challenges of doing this work is that you try and stay, and there's a reason why they call it macroeconomics versus microeconomics, because you're making a macro level view of jobs moving around, which I would say are defensible at a macro level. But if you dive down into any given community, you have to look at your assumptions and adjust them according for that particular community. It doesn't undermine the macro view, though. I hope that makes some sense. I think you're on mute, Chantal. Sorry.
Yeah, she's muted.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Sorry, I said thank you. Yes, it does.
Okay, good. Thanks.
I suppose it's fair to say with efficiencies gained that utilities will also, economize and be able to grow the talent around some of the solutions that they're providing too. So it's It's not that there's so much losers, it's about redistributing, I guess, the investment opportunities.
Yes, that's very true. I like I said, I say that with some hesitation. It's really about redistributing energy dollars.
At costs.
Mhm.
Okay, any other questions on the floor? I don't see any hands. If you'll let me, Rob, I do have another question. In terms of the multipliers, you mentioned the American Council multipliers. Is it true that was there any available multipliers at the regional or provincial levels?
No, I don't mind revealing that was a frustration, that we couldn't find them. I know information's always emerging, but and I'm obviously open to even at this point in the project to revisiting that. But I have not found any. The ones I did reference were so qualified that they weren't better than the ACEEE ones. So we ended up sticking with them all the way through the project.
Yeah, Stats Canada does have multipliers that we use provincially for these purposes.
Yeah. And maybe we could connect on that. I did look at them and found them to be pretty close to the ones I used. And then sometimes the boundaries around those categories were a little different than the ACEEE. And so I made the choice, and we did a lot of interaction. Eddie will attest to this, around sticking with the ones that we had, because I made that point when I showed that slide, Susan, that the relativity between the categories holds up pretty well. But it doesn't mean we should continue. I think we want to have real empirical information as local as possible. Obviously, we're making local analysis as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Margot, you have your hand.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Eddie. And thanks, Rob. Excellent presentation. I always struggle with this kind of thing and wonder, to get through this energy transition, we're going to have to use a lot of energy, use a lot of materials, and basically a lot of the remaining fossil fuels for manufacturing and so on. And I wonder always if there's any room to be advising people of investing the efficiency in the renewable windfall, let's say cash windfall, the money that's being saved by an entity, be it a municipality or whatever, back into lowering impact. Because if all of the benefit is just more economic production and more economic activity, I mean, aren't we kind of defeating the purpose? I just leave it with you, because it's something that bothers me every presentation I see, and I wonder, why aren't we talking about how this benefit is going to be reinvested, and not just in making more widgets or making more factories or you know what I mean? Thanks.
I do. Excellent point. Thanks, Martin.
There is a great example from Perth Andover where they reinvest savings to the free arena and swimming passes to citizens in the community, as a social benefit. But it doesn't all have to be necessarily the efficiency improvements, but if folks can see a direct benefit or value to them in the community, can provide that buy-in and support that's needed in the common vision for net zero future. Communities are not mandated to reinvest those savings in sort of longer term or capital investments in efficiencies and emission reductions, although that could be coming down the road. You never know.
Wouldn't it be nice if they were incentivized to invest it in, native forest land or something like that, some kind of complementary measure?
Capturing carbon sequestration. I'm going to close the session if there's no further comments. Thanks, Margot. Great. Okay, thanks very much, Rob.
If I could just say, I'd like to just quote Luke from ACOA. He said, kind of a joke, because I'm regretting again saying winners and losers. Luke said we're all winners when we work together on the green transition.
That's
But
right.
thank you for that, Luke. Appreciate it.
Okay, super. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Eddie.